Welcome to In the Garden. I'm your host, Joyce Hochbrunn. Today we're going to talk about native plants for your garden. In a past show we did perennials and grasses, and today we're going to talk mainly about some shrubs and some trees. Our first one I'm going to talk about is a New Jersey tea, and it's said that the colonists used the leaves to make a maybe not so great tasting tea during the Revolutionary War, or leading up to it. But it is native to most of Minnesota as well. It's not just New Jersey. It's hardy up to zone 3. It'll help, it likes sun to part sun. It's a shorter shrub, but it only gets 2 to 3 feet tall. It likes a medium to dry soil conditions. So this is, maybe you've got a dry hillside someplace. This might be a perfect shrub to put on that. It'll not only be, it has a very deep rooted, it has almost a tree-like root structure. So you may, it'd be good for holding soil on a hillside, good for erosion control. So this might be something if you've got a problem area that tends to wash and you just want it stabilized. This might be a good plant to consider. It's also the host plant for the spring azure butterfly, and as I noted, it's quite deep-rooted. Our next one is called buttonbush, and it's so named because it has these cute little pom-pom-like buttons for blooms. It's native mainly to the St. Croix and Minnesota river valleys in Minnesota, but it will grow all over the state. This one would be good if you want to do a rain garden or you have a wetland area. It can get big, 12 feet tall by 8 feet wide, so it's not a tiny one. Although there is, I want to say it's called Sugar Shack, I'm not 100% sure, a variety in the nursery trade that only gets, I think it's in that 3 to 4 foot range, which makes it maybe a little bit more manageable in your garden. And check it out if you don't have room for the big guy, but you want something a little bit smaller that'll tolerate the wet areas. This might be a good choice for you. And then we have dwarf bush honeysuckle, Deervilla lanicera. Okay, the bush honeysuckle is native to about 2/3 of Minnesota. It'll grow in sun to mostly shade, medium to dry conditions. It'll get about 4 feet tall by 5 feet wide. Once it starts blooming, it blooms most of the summer. The blooms are not super showy, but it is a honeysuckle. Remember, a true honeysuckle or lanicera, so it's great for pollinators. There isn't a time I go out there that I don't have bees on it when it's in bloom. It's got beautiful fall color, kind of a burgundy red. Sometimes the new growth will have a reddish tinge to it. Now, one thing you want to watch is it does sucker. So mine didn't until about the 5th year. But now I just go around in the spring every couple of years and I just do a root pruning around the outside edges. I kind of decide this is where I want you to stay. So go around with a sharp shovel. I've even dug out a few small clumps to share with other people. Sand serviceberry. You've probably heard of serviceberries. Some of you may already be growing them. There are a couple that are native to most of Minnesota, and there are others that are native to pockets here and there, or to the East Coast or south of us or north, mostly east of us. But any of them will probably do quite well here. This one is sand serviceberry, Amelanchier sanguinea, hardy in zone 3 through 6. This one's native, like I said, to most of Minnesota. This one is more a shrub to about 6 feet. Full to part sun, and it provides May bloom for pollinators and edible berries if you can get them before the birds do. It's medium to medium dry soil. Then we have Allegheny serviceberry, Amelanchier laevis, native in most of Minnesota. Full to part sun, zones 3 through 8. This one will get up to 25 feet, and again it has edible berries. And one thing I forgot to mention, all of the Amelanchiers have lovely fall color. So if you like that fall color, the brilliant colors, these are some good ones to do. There is one quite popular in the nursery trade called, I believe it's Autumn Brilliance. You can get tree form, single stem tree form or shrub type, but it is quite lovely. The flowers in the spring are pretty. The berries are gorgeous on it. Like I said, I have yet to get one to taste, or to make jam or jelly out of, because the birds always beat me, but I'm trying to be patient. The one I put in is only a couple years old, so it doesn't have a lot of berries yet anyway. But it does get that lovely, lovely fall color. Okay, nine bark. And if you're familiar with nine barks at all, yes, it is a native shrub. It has been, in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, breeders have been busy working with it. Now, the native one will get, or the native unadulterated variety, can get 6 to 8 feet tall and 4 to 5 feet wide. But there are still Physocarpus opulifolus. There are dwarf varieties now, and they come in, instead of just plain green, which is still pretty with the flowers, there's kind of a lime colored one, there's Copertina, I couldn't even begin to remember all the different varieties, but you can have just about any colored leaves you want. One thing to keep in mind, they'll grow in sun to part shade. They are very adaptable to different soil conditions, wet, dry, sun and shade. They provide food for birds. There's little fruits hanging on there. You probably wouldn't even notice them most of the time, but they do provide food for birds, and they have a quite dense thing, so they also, their foliage is quite dense, so they also provide shelter for birds and insects. They're hardy to zone 2, which there's not a lot of things that tough. That's one tough shrub. One thing to keep in mind is they do sometimes have a tendency to get powdery mildew. Usually when we have a summer like we've had this last one, with high humidity and dry conditions. So sometimes just keeping the ground around it watered, not the foliage, but the ground, just the soil, remember, can help. Also, when you prune, they have a very arching, fountain-like growth habit. And a lot of times I see people come in and just go, and I'm going, don't do that. Just, if you need to prune back a few tips that are kind of wayward, do that. And then you go in, and every year, or usually every year once it's established, go down to the base and you take out anywhere from maybe 1 to 5 of the very biggest stems to allow air into the center and to let some of the new growth come up. Red osier dogwood, and I'm sure everyone is probably familiar with this one. And yes, it's definitely native to Minnesota, to all of Minnesota. I think there are 1 or 2 counties up in the very northwest corner of the state where it wasn't found natively, but probably is now. Cornus sericea. It used to be called Cornus stolonifera because it does run some, and you might still, if you're at a nursery, you might see it with either one of those names. Not all the nurseries have switched over to new tags, so you might find it under either one, but it's 7 to 9 feet tall, so it can get quite large, or larger sometimes. I've had some out and back on a wet year that was a good 12 feet. Full to part sun, wet to medium soil. It provides berries as a food source for wildlife. It's the host plant for the azure skipper. One thing to keep in mind, if you don't have room for the big guy, and it comes in, there are also both red twig and yellow twig varieties. And a lot of people like to cut some of those stems to use in their winter containers. Go for it. You won't hurt the plant. And you do need, if you want to keep that nice color, you do need to prune out the oldest stuff every year. Preferably most of it in the spring, but if you want to snitch 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 for your pots, it won't mind once it's established. Do keep in mind there are some cultivars that have either better red color or there aren't quite as many cultivars of yellow, but there are Isanti, Cardinal, Fire Dance, and some of these stay more in that 4-foot range for height. And then this is probably one of my favorite small native trees, Pagoda Dogwood, Cornus alternifolia. It's native to almost all of Minnesota, anywhere from 15 to 25 feet tall, timed by a spread of about 20 to 30 feet. Part sun to shade. It's an understory tree, so it does prefer, to have some shade. It doesn't want to be out in the blazing sun. Medium wet to medium dry soil. It does seem to do better, and probably because it's an understory tree where it has some wind protection, so you probably don't want to put it out in the middle of your yard where the wind is going to whack it. It can be susceptible to golden canker, which is some of the stems will just kind of get this sort of yellowish gold color to them. If you catch it early enough, if you're watching, you can prune out some of those stems. Once it gets into the main trunk, you're probably going to have to remove it. Now that doesn't stay in the soil, so you could replace it with another one, but it has that lovely kind of layered oriental look to it. The next shrub I'm going to talk about is the American cranberry bush, or you might have heard it referred to as high bush cranberry, Viburnum trilobum. Sun to part sun, wet to medium soil. It can get up to 12 feet. It has excellent fall color. It's native to over 2/3 of Minnesota. The berries, the birds usually leave alone until after they've frozen a few times. They're quite tart. You can use them to make jellies and such out of, but that's going to be one of your tangier jellies. I tried it once just for fun, and it was okay. I won't say it was my favorite, so I kind of left them for the birds. But it's a good one. It's quite, makes good cover for birds. Pheasants tend to like the berries probably more than most songbirds do. And this one really is probably one of my favorites. I'm thinking about taking out some others around my house and adding a few more of these. Black chokeberry, Aronia melanocarpa. It'll grow in sun to part shade, wet to medium soils. It can get 3 to 8 feet tall by 4 to 6 feet wide, but the cultivars are more compact, topping out at maybe 4 feet. And they have less suckering. In fact, the one I have, I've had for 5 years, and I haven't seen any suckering yet. It's been at least 5 years, maybe longer. It does have edible berries. They turn almost black when they're ripe. Again, I have yet to get a berry from them. They are quite tart, but they are also very high in vitamin C. So if you want to make juice and add some honey or use them for jams or jellies, assuming you can get to the berries before the birds do, go for it. It has really pretty fall color, oranges and kind of burgundies on the leaves. So it's if you like that fall color, that's another good one for that. I'm trying to think of what some of the cultivars are. I think there's Viking is one. I'm sure if you look it up, you'll find plenty to look at. But this is just a really neat shrub. Then we're going to go into a few trees. Ironwood is probably one of my favorite natives. It's an understory tree, but it will grow in full sun. So it'll grow in anything from deep shade to full sun. It'll get 20 to 40 feet tall, so it's not a huge one. But a lot of people have smaller yards and don't have room for huge ones. Once it's established, it's fairly drought tolerant. Now, I still watered mine this summer because I'm not taking a chance. But it is somewhat drought tolerant once established. It has no serious pest or disease issues. The leaves drop fairly early in the season. I won't say it's brilliant fall color, but it's lots of kind of golds and bronzes, so it's quite pretty. The leaves are small on the ironwoods, so we're not talking big maple leaves or things that mat down. If you don't get them raked, no biggie. They'll blow into a flower bed someplace and be just fine. They can be a little hard to find, but the nursery trade responds to what people want. So If enough people start asking for them, more nurseries will start carrying them. I did have to do some hunting to find mine. As a master gardener, I can't give you can't recommend a nursery name, but if you start Googling online, I'm sure you'll find them. So just a neat tree. I put in a couple of them, and they're just, I just really, really am liking them. Another one that I've just put in the last couple of years is Blue Beech, Carpinus carolinea. Again, this will grow in full sun to full shade. It's a little bit smaller tree, only 20 to 35 feet tall, 20 to 35 feet wide. So it's kind of a, what should I say, more of a dome shaped at maturity. It's tolerant of a wide range of soil conditions. Anything from clay to sandy loam, it'll handle it. So they're nice. Again, a lovely fall color, kind of reds and oranges depending on the variety. There's a small one that tops out at maybe 20 feet by 15 feet wide, which is I think called Fire Spire. If you have a narrower space and you don't have room for a big wide one. But the fall color is incredible on them. I can't wait for them to get growing. They're not real fast growers. The bark, what I say, the wood is kind of a grayish color, the bark, and it looks kind of like somebody's guns, you know, so pumped up. It does take a while to develop that. It grows about anywhere from 12 to 24 inches in a year, more like 12 usually on a year like this one. So it's not a real fast one, but you know, sometimes you have to wait for good things. Another one that doesn't get enough respect is hackberry. Full sun, so at least 6 hours of sun. This one can get big, 40 to 60 feet tall, and a canopy of about 40 to 60 feet wide. This one grows well in a wide variety of conditions. Food source for a lot of songbirds. Probably its biggest claim is the really corky, ridgy bark it has. It gives a lot of winter interest to your yard. I've had people say that this is like the tree that if you have a tough spot, put in a hackberry. The fall color is, you know, nothing to write home about. It kind of goes yellowy brown and drops, but it is one tough tree, and I just think people don't plant it enough. So consider giving that one a thought. And then Kentucky coffee tree. And I know everybody's going, no, I don't want the seed pods. You can get male varieties, so you don't have seed pods. Full sun, so at least 6 hours a day. 60 to 75 feet tall by 40 to 50 feet wide, depending on the variety. Some are more columnar, some are more spreading. It's tolerant of a wide range of conditions. Bright yellow fall color. A few male selections are Espresso, Stately Manor, and True North. And kind of an interesting thing about the Kentucky coffee tree, it's mainly native to the southern half of the state. It's a very, very old tree in terms of its life on Earth. And the seed pods are very hard. In fact, they think that in prehistoric times, there was some mammal with powerful enough jaws to crack open the seed pods and get them growing and get groves of them going. Now we no longer have that, and they actually in the wild, even if you have the seeds, they very rarely germinate. They say they think eventually they might on their own just freeze thaw cycle, but it's very sporadic. So most of the ones that you get now are germinated in a lab. I can't remember the exact process they use, but it's kind of an interesting thing. They just get them germinated, but most of them now that you can buy in the nursery trade are going to be male cultivars. So you don't have to worry about the messy seed pods. I will say, young ones are not the most attractive tree in the nursery line. They kind of look like a pole with some sticks coming out. And in fact, that's what mine looks like. I put it in last summer. And I'm looking forward to getting a little more shape to it. It might take a few years. And it's kind of a medium grower in that 12 to 24 inch a year range. So that's one to keep in mind. And then, since we've been talking about plants, we're going to jump over to winter sowing. A lot of native seeds, because they developed here in Minnesota, they need a cold stratification, which means they need a cold, wet treatment, and then followed by heat. Some seeds might need 2 years of that. Unless you're very patient, you probably want to start with plants on that, but you can start a lot of them yourself. And if you don't want to mess with putting them into the refrigerator and taking them out, you use the winter sowing method. Take a milk jug or a water jug. Some people even that do a lot of them buy totes and punch hole, just clear totes. I'm not quite that crazy yet, but I just do a couple because I don't want 500 of any one plant necessarily. So, but any container that you can put drainage holes in, put at least 3 inches of good quality potting soil in. And then in January or so, when you're looking at the weather going, oh, get your native seeds, look at and most seed catalogs, native seed nurseries will have germination codes that tell you what they need, but you don't have to worry about it too much unless it's one that takes 2 years, so do check that. Sow your seeds in here. Be sure you put a label inside the jug with the seeds, because writing on it with marker will wash, it will fade, and you'll get these and go, what's this? So you get them in there, water it, moisten the soil. Then you take good old duct tape, tape this shut, stick it out in a snowbank, and forget about it till about April or May. Leave the top off. You get rid of the cap. Rain and snow will fall in there and keep it moist, and it will germinate when it's supposed to. When you see them starting to germinate, you can take off the duct tape and just kind of let it loose, and then as the plants get bigger and tougher, you can kind of fold it back, and you'll have soil in here so it doesn't tip. And you have your plants already hardened off. Now some people will put a whole mess of seeds in one thing. I mean, the whole packet of seed. I'm kind of like, I can't, And I also know myself well enough that they're probably not going to get taken care of until I take care of all of my other stuff first. I'll plant maybe 6 to 8 seeds in here, depending on how many I want of that particular plant. And I also know that I'm probably not going to get to them, so they're going to grow in here for a while. So that's another reason I don't. But people that do that and actually get to them earlier do what they call the hunk of seedling thing, and they just break it into chunks and plant little chunks of it wherever they want and let the strongest seedling win, I guess. So that is another way of doing it if you want. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there's a whole Facebook group just for winter sowing. But yeah, it's people that have done, and I'm not joking when I say there are people who use totes like this and sow it full of seeds, and I'm like, no, that's okay, but do what you want, okay? If you want to try that, go for it. And couldn't do one without talking at least briefly about jumping worms. Some quick facts: invasive species. They jump, wiggle, and are very active. They live in the leaf litter and the top few inches of soil on the forest floor or in your garden. They change the soil texture to look like coffee grounds. They strip the soil of nutrients, and if you don't replenish those nutrients with either fertilizer or more compost or whatever, they can kill some plants. Right now, prevention is the only way we have to manage them. So that brings me to, if you're sharing plants with somebody, hopefully none of you have jumping worms yet. They haven't been reported out here in McLeod County yet. Doesn't mean they aren't here. But just get into the habit of root washing plants that you share with people. Now in the spring, it would be eggs because they die when the weather gets cold. Once the ground freezes, the jumping worms that are there are going to die. You know, if you're digging in the fall, you'd see them because they're going to be full grown and moving like crazy if you touch them or wiggle, or they could even break off the tail in your hand if you pick them up. In the spring, it's little eggs, and they're a little harder to see. So just wash off the plant roots, give them a soak in a bucket for a little while, and hopefully you keep from spreading any to anybody else. How do you tell them apart? Just so you know, the earthworms we have here are not native to Minnesota either. And I know everybody else says, oh, I've got good, healthy soil here. I've got lots of earthworms. Well, they aren't native to Minnesota. They were all killed off during the last ice age. So most of them have come in from fishing and other things where people dumped their bait. So if you've got a fisherman in your family, tell them don't dump their bait. Put it in the garbage, not outside. Report new occurrences of jumping worms to the DNR, and this will be on the screen. Or we submit a report, and there's some ways to tell the difference. On the Asian jumping worms, they have a little, well, all earthworms have a little, if you do a little collar around them. On the Asian jumping worm, it is closer to the end of the worm. Where on the European earthworms, it's more like a third of the way down or better, maybe more. Also, the collar is, what do I want to say, like it's clenched in on the Asian jumping worm. And on the European earthworm, it's more like a saddle on going around it. So that's a couple ways to help you tell the difference. But just be aware, keep your eyes open, and do your best not to spread them. And thank you. Hope to see you next time in the garden.